Hi, everyone. My name is Scott Allen. I'm the CEO for the Family Medicine Education Consortium, and welcome to tonight's Hot Topics, where we're going to hear from Meritus Family Medicine Residency about tips and tricks for your digital interview. Welcome to all the Meritus folks on the call as well. Just a little bit of background about FMEC before I turn it over to Dr. Miller to talk about your digital interview. If you're not familiar with us, we are a regional coalition. We serve about 14 states and the District of Columbia in the Northeast US. So that's basically Ohio to the east and the Virginias to the north. We have an annual meeting each fall. Hopefully a few of you were able to join us about 3 weeks ago in Arlington, Virginia, where we had over 900 people come to our meeting, including about 89 family medicine residency programs who joined our residency fair. And we had about 300 students on scholarships who came to learn about family medicine and to meet the residency program. So it was a great success. We also do a series of awards for family physicians and others who advance primary care and do things like write poetry and prose. We have some learning collaboratives, including on integrative health. We have one coming up on breast and ovarian hereditary cancer in women, and a few others. And we have lots of ways you can get involved. So feel free to talk to me if you'd like to learn more about the FMEC. We are really a catalyst, convener, and incubator. And we have kind of three main focuses. One is to work with medical students in medical schools to promote family medicine and primary care, which we do, as I mentioned, by bringing medical students to our meeting. We help residents through their residency program experience and also as they transition out into careers to learn about different practice models and to do things like manage their debt. And we strengthen academic family medicine programs by convening the faculty and the program directors at our meeting and helping them learn from each other and learn how to teach in their residency programs. And just one last item to plug, if you didn't join us in Virginia, or if you did, please consider coming to our 2023 meeting. It's October 13th through the 15th in Providence, Rhode Island. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Miller.
Thank you so much, Scott. I am actually going to turn it over already to Dr. Aaron George. I didn't tell you about that, Scott, but he's going to introduce the evening.
Great.
Welcome, everybody. We'll hear from me at the end. I'm going to be the slide navigator. So if anything goes awry, I apologize ahead of time. Okay, Dr. George.
Well, greetings, everyone. I'm Aaron George. I'm a family physician and also a board member for the Family Medicine Education Consortium. And we wanted you to feel just like a real interview day. And that is, you're going to meet a lot of people really quickly. So Scott passing it to Brad, passing it to me. When you hit the ground running for your interview day, you're going to meet a lot of different individuals. We did not want to spend an hour of one person talking. So over the course of the next half an hour or so, we're going to present some background, hidden tips and tricks that we hope will help get you through interview season. And a number of the Meritus Family Medicine Residency faculty and residents are here, each of us to share one or two tips, introduce themselves. And again, we're going to present for maybe 25 or 30 minutes, and then we'll be open for questions afterwards. Feel free, if you'd like along the way, to enter a question in the chat box. We'll be following it, but we'll also make sure that any questions enter in the chat box will be answered by the end of tonight. And certainly, if you have a question, you want to vocalize it, we'll open for a little bit of a forum at the end of our time together. Now, I do just want to offer that there's been so much transition about interview processes over the last 3 to 4 years. And in fact, the interview process that you will engage in your career in this year or perhaps next year is entirely different than what your classmates did just a couple of years before in the same spot. We have transitioned almost entirely to a virtual world, and we recognize that that creates some apprehension. And so our goal tonight is to hopefully ease any anxiety about the interview, give you a couple of tips and tricks, and hopefully prepare you as best as possible. I do want to offer, as Scott had mentioned about the Family Medicine Education Consortium annual meeting, if you are a third year, second year, first year, or if you have classmates that will be applying in the years ahead, we really recommend that you attend that meeting. It gives you a chance to meet hundreds of residents and faculty in person, so that when you ultimately find that digital interview, the faculty may look at you and say, hey, I know you, I saw you at the FMEC meeting. So I would recommend, if you have a chance or you're advising any classmates that are applying years ahead, go to the meeting, meet some faculty so that when you show up, you're already a friendly face for interview season. So with that, I want to pass the microphone to my colleague, Dr. Catherine Figge, who is the Associate Program Director for Meritus Family Medicine Residency.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Dr. George. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. So as Dr. George mentioned, I'm the Associate Program Director here at Meritus, and I'm going to introduce tip number 1. So let's see, there we go. All right. So first thing is you're going to want to occupy the right mind space. So it's really the best thing you can do, especially on interview day. So whatever techniques you might have, follow your tried and true. But if you don't have a standard set of techniques, it's good to start to develop one, and you might want to practice that before interview day. This is an example of what might work well for you. So first off, take a deep breath. You have worked hard to arrive at this moment in your life. You belong here. So take a deep breath and experience that feeling of belonging. Feel the power of the potential that you've worked so hard to create. Allow your mind to be present and aware, and your body to be at ease. In order to do this, it's best to adopt a growth mindset. Meet the next stage of your life with openness and excitement. Now, you might have doubts or feel like that you're faking it till you make it, and that's fine. To some degree, we all do that. But don't let that distract you from your goals and the beauty of this moment. Use tools to help call you to the present, like mindfulness or positive affirmations. These tools will help to lower the sympathetic response that's related to stress and performance anxiety, and it will really help you on interview day. So I encourage you to use them daily, and especially in the hour before your interviews and the hour before the pre-interview dinner. They help solidify a positive mindset that will help you convey confidence and capability and show them that you're comfortable in yourself, which is really important if you're ready to begin that next stage of learning in your life. So I'd like everyone to say these with me now. They're right up on your computer screen. Okay, this is an example of a positive affirmation. So, and you could even put these right up on your mirror at home. But let's go ahead and start. And even if you're on mute, say it out loud because it really does matter. So first, I am calm. I am focused and engaged. My first impression will be a positive one.
My first impression
Today is my day. I'm ready for this interview. I answer difficult questions with grace and ease. I love residency interviews. My energy is contagious. I am a perfect candidate for this residency program. Good job. That's just the beginning, and I'm sure you will have wonderful, successful careers. Next up, I introduce Dr. George again to move on to tip 2.
I feel instantly at ease just going through that process. One of the things that you'll find that happens is as your interview day progresses and you go from interview to interview, we've watched that students will get more and more tense. They'll want to respond really quickly. And so give yourself permission to take a breath between your interviews. If someone asks you a question you don't know the answer to, it is okay to pause and take a breath and say, I'd like to think about that. And I think when we're in person, we do that more naturally. When we're looking at a camera screen, it's a little bit harder. So give yourself permission to take a pause, answer carefully, and even between interviews, close your eyes, take that breath, and pick one of those phrases that Dr. Figge had mentioned. I think that'll be helpful. Part of being ready and competent is planning ahead. We recognize that over the last several years, what had previously been an interview season of 10 or 12 interviews on average per student is now sometimes 20, 30, and 40 interviews. And some of you may be looking ahead at your interviews and thinking that you'll be bouncing from one to another. And the reality is that that can be distracting. It also can limit your ability to truly connect with any one program or any one faculty or resident. So make sure you take a couple of minutes to a couple of hours, especially for the places that you really have high on your priority list, and do your research. Make sure that you've read the website up and down so that you know some of the nuances about each program itself. Make sure that you take the time to try to understand who you may be interviewing, and come prepared with questions about either the region, the area, the clinic, the hospital, or something else that demonstrates to those that you interview with that you care about them, that you've understood their local context, what makes them unique or different. I'll share, as a faculty member interviewing students, it is really clear the ones that haven't done their homework, and that falls flat. When they ask questions about a big city and we're a rural program, that's a red flag. They don't know where we are. And if we're going to spend 3 years together and we're going to become almost like family, we're going to spend a lot of time and we're going to go through a lot, I would want to hope that anyone that wants to choose me as a part of their family has done a little bit of background work, wants to understand my context. And so we recommend that you take just the minimum amount of time so that the questions you ask and the answers that you give align with the program that you're interviewing with. It's so important. This isn't just about you looking good on camera and answering questions and having a CV. It's about making a connection, and it's one that's going to be really impactful on you and the program. So plan ahead, and part of that planning is actually looking around and making sure that your setup is solid. So I want to hand the mic over to Dr. Okawobi, who's one of our faculty members at Meritus Family Medicine, to share some tips and tricks about how you can look good no matter where you are.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Obafemi Okawobi. I'm a family physician by training, and I'm one of the core faculty members here at Meritus Family Medicine. I'll be talking to you about setting up your virtual environment. Very, very important in this process. And it's mostly within your control. You can actually control the room that you're going to be in, your technology, make sure your computer equipment is working well, your internet access is consistent, and so you don't have any undue interruptions. It's also important to have adequate lighting and also the appropriate camera with a chair at the height where your eyes can actually see through right across to the camera, so people can see your face and your facial expressions. Make sure or try your best to have an uninterrupted space or an interruption-free space, so that you don't have undue interruptions when the process is going on. I'll just go back to the previous slide. So set your background scene, minimize distractions. If you're in a place where you can't really control that background space, you want to acknowledge that to people that you're talking with, so they know what's going on behind you and they don't get distracted and focus on you. Make eye contact all the time, and try to have a pen and paper ready so you can write down points that you want to bring up later and ask questions, and always be professional. Things can happen. Next slide. Things can happen that especially if your camera is not on the right angle, you might have things planned for afterwards. But if you look at this picture, you see that this person is wearing. This is actually Christopher Reeve's son. So he couldn't. I mean, Superman's son couldn't get it right as well. But you could see that he was wearing his jacket. It looked professional up there, and then wasn't really wearing pants. This was very glaring to everyone on the other side. Some things do happen that you can do all your best to control things, but you could also have interruptions that would happen. The next slide would show us a little video of the potentials that can happen you don't secure the space. This is a BBC reporter. Oh.
Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me. My apologies.
The region.
North Korea, South Korea's policy choices on North Korea have been severely limited in the last 6 months to a year.
So this are potential things that can happen, but we try our best to kind of mitigate this. But I would hand over to Dr. Siriki, who's one of our third-year residents, who's going to talk to you about how to make the most of your interview day. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. O. That video is funny every single time. Like Dr. O said, my name is Tomi Siriki, and I am one of the third-year residents at Meritus Family Medicine. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I went to Rowan University School of Osteopathic Medicine. Let's get going. So tip 4, how to make the most of your interview. First things first, you want to treat every opportunity to interview or speak with someone as if it's an in-person interview or discussion. Obviously, we're in a new era where virtual interviewing is much more of a thing than it's ever been, but you want to make sure that you are always on your P's and Q's and that you don't slip at all, right? So you want to make sure that you're dressed appropriately. You wouldn't come to an in-person interview not dressed for the part, not ready to participate. So you want to make sure that whether it's a happy hour that's meant to be a little bit more casual, you're not too casual. If it's a meet and greet that's also meant to be somewhat casual, you want to still present as if you would in an in-person interview. So that's very important. Next thing, you want to start on a high note. You want to begin with a very strong introduction. I know that when we've done meet and greets in the past for our program, a lot of times when we go back and kind of debrief, there are things that people say in their introduction that help us remember who people are, because we just see so many people. But if someone, tag something to themselves that's memorable in a good way, it's a lot easier to make an impression and ensure that you're kind of on the minds of those that you're interviewing with. So that's really important. It's easy to get kind of lost in the shuffle with virtual interviews. Sometimes the groups are smaller, but sometimes the groups are a little bit larger. At times, some of the virtual interviews are arranged in a way where there's a common area where everyone kind of groups at a certain point in time before breaking out into smaller groups or individual interviews. And, not everyone is as outgoing or boisterous and vocal. So if you're one of those people who is a little bit quieter, you want to make sure that you're not getting lost in the shuffle and that your presence is missed. So to that point, be present. You want to be engaged. On interviews that are virtual, it's easy to get distracted. If it's not your opportunity to talk, you could find yourself on your phone or maybe surfing the net. And people can actually tell from our end when your vision isn't kind of directed at the camera, or your eyes are wandering, you're looking up, you're looking down. Those are all things that interviewers notice. So you want to make sure that you're engaged. So when you're not speaking, you at least look like you are engaged in the conversation and you're almost silently participating. And then most importantly, you want to be yourself. In any interview that you go on, you want to make sure that people get to know who you are in that short amount of time and really bring your true self. Being anyone other than yourself won't get you far. So just try and be calm, collected, engaged, present, and try and just be yourself. Let's see. Stand out, but don't monopolize or dominate. we've had situations where we've had people stand out for the wrong reasons. You want to make sure that we're not remembering you for the things that you're doing that aren't as positive. Even to this day, we have people who interviewed with us 2 years ago that everybody remembers for the wrong reason. So don't be that person. In virtual interviews and group settings, you also want to make sure that you're not monopolizing or dominating the situation. Like I said, because it's easy for other people to kind of fall back, in an attempt to kind of keep a conversation going, you can find yourself talking a lot if you're someone who's comfortable in those settings. So you want to make sure that you're giving other people an opportunity to talk and ask their own questions, and don't seem like you're commandeering the situation a little bit too much. You want to try and make connections with anyone that you meet, whether it's a fellow interviewee, the residents in the program that you're applying for, the faculty, staff, anybody, because those again are the ways that they're going to remember who you are. At the end of the interview season, we see and go through so many applications and meet so many amazing people. And just because we're all human, it's really easy to forget who people are sometimes. And I mean, going through rank lists last year, I remember we would say, oh yeah, that's that person who's from this area, or who really enjoyed this, or had this interesting fact about themselves. And so it made it, one, a good way for us to know a little bit more about you, and two, just a really quick way to get to know you. And you never know like what kind of opportunities can come out of various conversations. So, if it's an opportunity where there's multiple little group conversations going on, or it's a group setting in the virtual space, you want to make sure that you're having small side conversations with different people, because you just never know like where those conversations could lead you. You also want to make sure you're taking notes. At the same time, you also don't want to seem like you're engaged. So I would personally refrain from taking notes on your phone, and maybe have a pen and paper out, jot some stuff down, because just like we see a number of applicants, you guys also meet a ton of people, and it's easy to forget people and to forget certain facts about different programs. And those are the things that you want to refer to at the end of kind of this process when you're getting ready to make your rank list. You want to make sure you have some notes about places that you're really considering, so that you can make a really solid decision about how you rank. But like I said, in those virtual settings, you just want to make sure that you're not looking like you're not engaged. You also want to make sure that, if you have questions, you ask them. Usually most of these situations will allow for some opportunity for further questions to be asked at the end of the session. But also at the same time, don't feel pressured to also have to ask questions. I know that the more you guys do this, you'll feel somewhat of a sense to have to ask a question. And then sometimes the questions maybe aren't as relevant, or aren't, as strong of a question. So you want to make sure that you're asking some good, solid questions, but also don't feel pressured. We've all been there, so we understand that there is this feeling to always have a question to ask, but a lot of times, especially by the end, you've probably seen a lot of stuff on the internet because you've done your research, or maybe some questions you had already been asked or answered previously when you spoke with someone else. So don't feel too much pressure in that regard. But here are a few different topics that you could ask questions on. And I know for me, these are some of the things on this list are things that I didn't necessarily think of when I was applying. So if you wanted to take a picture of this, I would totally recommend you do that. And you can keep this in mind as you go along the residency search. So program strengths and challenges. I think to step back just a second too, when you're looking at these various questions, some questions I think are really great to ask a resident, and some questions in general are really great to ask faculty or program director. And then there are some questions that I think anyone could probably answer. So sometimes I think it's easy to group those questions in that way, so that as you are going through your residency day and or your interview day, and like who you're going to be talking to, you can kind of separate those questions so that you don't get into a situation where you run out of questions, or you're asking the same questions to the same people, because you don't want to do that either. So back to the questions, program strengths and challenges. You know, it's always good to find out what people in that current program feel they're really good at and what things that they're working on. Mission, vision, and area of focus are also important. Resident expectations, how do the faculty view the responsibilities of the resident and what do they expect of the residents? Support and mentorship is always very important as well. You want to find out what opportunities are available for residency support throughout your time at that program, whether or not you're assigned a mentor or an advisor, or if you are able to kind of just reach out to whoever you connect the best with. Expected patient population, I think, is also very important as you're trying to figure out what population and type of patient pool you would like to treat or train within. For instance, we're in a rural program. And so what we see as a demographic is probably different from what, you know, a more urban environment will see. And so if you're someone who has a particular interest in working in urban environments, then Hagerstown probably isn't it. So you want to know kind of what you're getting yourself into and who your patient population will be. Asking about any new or anticipated changes, things that may be coming down the pipeline for the program. Sometimes individuals will kind of have an idea about what's going on, and then sometimes they won't, as things are ever evolving and changing. But this is a good way to kind of get a little bit of headway on what might be coming down the pipeline. What's the call schedule like? What are the research opportunities that are available? Are there community service opportunities? And if so, how is that factored into your residency schedule? And, you know, how have the residents enjoyed doing those things? What are the types of activities that they've done? All resident experience is always a big and a great question to ask. I would probably, if you talk to any resident, I always would encourage you to ask like what their experience has been, because that's a reflection somewhat of what your experience could also be. How are residents evaluated? What's the, you know, how is that weekly, daily, yearly, monthly? You know, like how does the program keep track of resident progress, and what are the plans put in place if residents aren't necessarily progressing in a certain way? Those are all very important questions. Resident wellness is also important. How does your program value wellness? Are there things put in place to help support the residents during their journey? Because as we all know, residency is not easy. But I think if you have a good support system, whether that's personally or within your program, that can just help make things a little bit better. Education stipends are things that I didn't really know about. Meritus gives us I think a really hefty education stipend, and we're able to use those funds over our 3 years for a plethora of things. So that's also a nice added benefit. And then you want to find out if there's any other kind of like tidbits or perks really that your program offers. And a big question, I think, for faculty and residents is why this program? From a resident perspective, why did that resident pick this program? What was it about the program that drew them there? And for the faculty too, it's like, why are they there? Why do they feel a connection to this place and to the residents that they're teaching every single day? So I think that's one of the biggest questions that you could definitely ask. And then last but not least, life outside of residency. I think work-life balance is extremely important. And so you want to ensure that the residents that you could potentially be working with feel that they do have a balance. Some places have more of a balance than others. So you just want to know exactly what you're getting yourself into. So these are just a few questions that you could ask, and I'm sure there's a ton others out there. But I hope that this is somewhat helpful. I'm going to pass this on to Dr. Q for tip number 5.
Thanks, Tommy. I couldn't help but think about being memorable in a good way. If I say red Kool-Aid to this gang, everybody in our program smiles. We had a dude who sucked down this enormous jug of red Kool-Aid while he was doing the interview. And every time we want to think about what not to do, we talk about red Kool-Aid. I mean, it was it was just that hilarious. So memorable. I love the way you said that, Tommy. Memorable in a good way. So yeah. Anyway, Thank you, Tommy. I'm Paul Questenberry. I'm the program director, and want to review a couple things with you, moving on to the next tip. But I want to first give you a tip, and I put some links in the chat. AAMC has published an article about best practices for residency interviewing, and it talks a little bit about the nuts and bolts of how residency programs do interviewing. And one of the questions that I get asked frequently is, okay, so what is your program looking for in a resident? And the answer is self-evident if you know where to look. It is in their mission and vision statement. So what do I mean by that? So if you go to websites, and I actually did this in preparation for this session, if you go onto a residency website and look at their mission and vision statement, you can find the values that they hold as important, because these are the competencies or values that a program will be looking for the candidates that they put on their match list, okay? These also form the basis for the questions that they ask during the interview. For example, on those websites, I found a number of sites that mention community service, community connection, and community commitment. So what that means is those programs are looking for a resident who wants to be committed and connected in the community where they serve, not only in residency, but they feel that that's important for a family physician. And I'll just give you a hint, we too feel that community connection and commitment is important. So what does that mean? So that means that a question would be, what part of family medicine is important to you, as an open-ended question to find out if community service is important to you, or more specifically, they might ask a question like, tell us about a meaningful community service experience that you have participated in. And so in this diagram on the left of the slide, this is straight from that AAMC article, they identify a value or a competency, they put those together, and they develop questions based on those competencies, and they ask questions that bring a resident to ask or talk about those values. Next slide, Brad. So how to wind down an interview. Go ahead and put all of those points in there. So the most important part of the interview portion is knowing yourself. Scott Peck, or not Scott Peck, there's a book about 7 habits where he says, beginning with the end in mind. It is really, really important to know yourself. So residency searching is about knowing what you need. Many people spend a lot of time creating this busy spreadsheet of, I like this about this program, I didn't like this, well, that's psycho. Thanks, Aaron, the 7 habits of highly successful people. Why did I blank on that while we were talking about this? People create this elaborate spreadsheet, like the busy one in the middle down there, and they like this, but they didn't like this. But in the end, what it boils down to is this connection that people feel like, hey, there's my people. And that's really what is important. I love the analogy that's I don't know if you know who that's at the right of that slide. That's Boo from Monsters, Inc. She was very focused in the whole movie about finding love and connection with the guys, and she was very focused. And it's really important to stay focused on what is important to you and staying connected with that. The other thing it's really important is to know yourself, and if there is a deficiency or something in your portfolio or your record that is a deficiency or something that's there, people say, well, should I talk about it? Should I not? Talk about it, you all. Learn how to talk about it with sense and honesty and just integrity. Talk about it. It is a red flag to programs when people have a significant gap in their medical school or board failures and there's not a mention of it or not an honest story about it. And realize that people who are doing interviewing all the time have significant BS meters. So just make sure you know that, and you really want to make sure you're ready to share a story about it. And then the other thing you don't want to do is to share the same story with every person that you interview with. There may be a pivotal life event that was important to you and you want to share it with everybody, but remember, all the folks that are doing your interview are going to share with each other and talk at the end. At least we do. And sharing that same story is not a good idea. Once or twice, maybe great, but not every time. And then it's really important to make sure that you realize that it's a big deal for residencies to offer an interview spot. So say thank you. It takes millions of dollars and thousands of skilled hours to build a family medicine program. So giving away a spot is a really big deal. And faculty and hospitals and programs take a lot of time to make sure that a candidate is going to have what it takes. Next slide, Brad. So as you're winding down an interview and you're asking those good questions, if you feel like you have exhausted your questions and you don't have any more, take a big deep breath like Dr. Faggy said, and don't ask any more questions. It is okay to stop and take a break. Often when we say to people, do you have any more questions? That is our way of saying, hey, we're done, we're good. So take that as a cue to say, okay, we're good here. I've shared what I've needed and I've gotten what I need. So it is appropriate for you to say, I don't have any more questions. Thank you for your time. It would give you and your interviewer a great break. Sometimes you can ask a personal question. Hey, I saw, Tommy, that you like this. I like this. Or, hey, Dr. Miller, I see that you're interested in this. I'm interested in that too. It's perfectly appropriate to connect and ask personal, or to connect personally or about the program and to dig in that as well. Sometimes people do want to ask some questions. I put a link on there, the second one. The American Academy of Family Physicians actually has an article about good questions to consider asking. So I put the link there in the chat, AAFP questions for residency interviews. So keep that in mind and just make sure you read important clues. And if the interviewer is doing what the dude on the right is doing, you probably should say we're done, okay? Anyway, next, that's tip 5, how to wind down an interview. Next is the lovely and talented Dr. Jasmine Galati.
Thank you, Dr. Q. What a lovely introduction. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Jasmine Galati. I'm a current second year and chief resident over at Meritus. I went to Edward Via College of Osteopathic Medicine down in Blacksburg, Virginia, before coming here. So I will go over tip number 6 after the interview process. So the hard part's done. You've aced your interview, but there's so many things to think about after you leave that Zoom call. For instance, sending thank you notes or emails. These follow-up communications should be sent within 1 week of your interview date so that no one forgets who you are. This will most likely go to the program coordinator whomever has been in touch with you consistently regarding the interview process. You can definitely address those whom you've interviewed with in that communication, and be sure to include things that stood out to you from your interviews. If you have more than one follow-up question or comment, try to send everything in one concise note or email. Programs will be inundated with several of these from applicants, so limiting the amount of emails you send is important. This is also why including key elements that stood out during your discussions can go a long way in helping programs re-identify you and the connection you made. And after the interview itself, you also want to consider noting down important key features of the program that will help you make your final rank list. As Dr. Sariki was talking about, a good comparison grid with pros and cons, or an Excel spreadsheet, not as busy as the one that Dr. Q showed, can be helpful when you sit down at the end of the whole process and decide your list based on your priorities and values. I personally use a spreadsheet that I updated after every interview I went on. It made it easier to move things around, and I was able to keep a tentative rank list that way, so I wasn't super overwhelmed at the end of the process. In regards to emails you receive back from programs after your interview, try not to read too much into how much or how little they are sending you. Just as you want to thank them for your time, they are also wanting to do the same, but different programs do have different protocols and styles of post-interview communication. You have to remember that virtual interviewing is a newer process to everyone involved. Many of you are going to get second look invites from programs that are interested in you. These can be both in-person site visits or online second looks. Some things to consider with these include how will the program be handling COVID precautions. You may have a certain timeline to get tested or have to present proof of vaccination, or both. In-person second looks can also be quite costly depending on travel and lodging. Your current schedules might not be too forgiving, especially if you're in a 4th year of medical school, in terms of scheduling a second look visit. And it's okay to decline an in-person second look visit due to these reasons. You could always reach out to the program to see if they'd be willing to accommodate a virtual second look. In my experience personally, during my 4th year of medical school, COVID was newer. We were in the thick of it. Guidelines were definitely a lot stricter. My hospital's quarantine policy would have prevented me from finishing my academic year if I left and then came back from the state. And I was down in Virginia. I wanted to come back to Maryland. So I wasn't able to do so personally, but it didn't affect anything. So it's okay, totally okay to do that. It's important to get these details ironed out if you're interested in visiting a program. Also keep in mind that it's totally okay if a program doesn't offer you a second look. That doesn't mean you aren't a good candidate for them. It shouldn't influence how you view or rank that program if you are genuinely interested and they do align with your personal views. So after all of that's done, you got your post-interview communication, you have your pros and cons ready. It's time to put together that rank list. And you are more than welcome to express to a program that you're highly interested, but I would be careful with your wording with this. Be sure not to include final ranking position. That's a big no-no. Even if you're communicating with the program that you're ranking first, I would advise not to email them saying that you're ranking them first. I feel like that's a huge faux pas. Be more generic with your wording. You can still be sincere. This type of communication is definitely optional. And when you're ready, finalize your rank list, send it in, and relax. You just took part of one of the most strenuous things you will ever go through. And if you went with your gut and stayed aligned with your personal values, you're going to end up where you need to be no matter what. That's probably my biggest piece of advice. So in terms of odds and ends, that was the last official tip. So different odds and ends, programs do host a variety of recruitment events. You don't have to feel obligated to attend every single one, but if you are very interested in a program, attending at least one of these can be helpful. If anything, just to get different questions answered, a group gets to interact with you more. Like Dr. Sariki said, you want to make sure you're on your best behavior during these events. Treat every event professionally. Be careful about being too informal. Sometimes it's difficult to get a word in if there are a lot of people in attendance, especially virtually. So not talking is okay, but you want to avoid looking bored or distracted. You want to be attentive towards the information relayed, the dialogue that's going on. In terms of exiting these events, you can do so verbally if the opportunity presents, or just leave a nice comment in the chat, thanking them for their time. Be sure to include your contact information. For a lot of these kinds of events, residents or faculty will also be leaving their contact information in the chat boxes. At least that's my personal experience. So make sure you take note of that as well, because you might need those email addresses. Last but not least, be sure to look over all of your social media pages for inappropriate or unprofessional content. This includes Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and now TikTok. Believe it or not, some people are posting some weird things on TikTok, so you want to be careful about that. Programs will look at these things. It can definitely play a role in the process, but you all will shine during the interview season, so don't ever give them a chance to build a negative impression of you. And that's my biggest tips for you guys. So with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Miller to wrap up.
Thank you so much. Let me just stop sharing here. This is our group here at Meritus. All right. Well, so we wanted to, anyway, I'm Brad Miller. I'm one of the faculty members, core faculty members here. I'm also what they call the DIO, which is the person that sort of helps make sure that the institution is providing good learning environment for learners, students and residents. So we wanted to be able to offer some time for any questions. Again, if you don't have any questions, we went through all that stuff. If you don't have any questions, that's okay. But certainly this is a time to clarify anything. You're probably getting a lot of different advice from different people over the course of the past 6 months or so. And the biggest thing, you know, I've been in medical education as both as a program director and now as DIO. This is coming up on my 16th year. And you know, the biggest thing I've seen over the years that's changed is just the heightened anxiety level. And I don't think the pandemic and moving to a virtual arena has made that any better. So you're all worried, right? You're trying to make a really big decision without actually being on site in some cases. And so, and we're trying to make a big decision by trying to figure out who you are and not seeing you. There's a lot of things that happen with face-to-face connection. And so we're hoping that these tips and tricks really do give you some, you know, baseline to use that will really help you, you know, feel more confident and stand out, and help programs say, boy, this person really does know what we're doing and understands us, had really good questions about this program. They're very professional, their background and their video was not all chaotic, and they were dressed nicely, and boy, they just came across well. And this is a very important part of the whole process. And so we hope that these tips and tricks helped you. So either through the chat, or you can, you know, unmute yourself, you can ask a question, please do so. And then any other faculty members or anybody need to say anything else, please do so as well.
I might add, just thinking about, as you guys are thinking, what values are important to you all, thinking about stories that tell about who you are and your values, because as programs ask questions about your experiences, it really is important to think about things that have been moving. Interesting, I don't know if you've heard about the supplemental application process that will probably be coming to family medicine next year, but the idea of important experiences is going to come to the forefront. So thinking about things that are important to you and sharing that in the interview experience can be very helpful to know who you are. So I just thought I'd share that, and thinking about that for interview questions.
I would like to wish Jasmine a happy birthday.
Thank you, Tommy.
Ali has a question, it looks like.
Can everyone hear me? Oh, perfect. First of all, thank you, Fmec, thank you, Meritus, for doing this for us. We really appreciate it. I had a question about behavioral type questions and how to approach them. I've been like searching online, and I'm just thinking about what's the best approach to answer these questions. Is it what comes to mind first? Because sometimes I'm looking at the question, I'm like, okay, this question requires time for me to think about. It's not simply something I can come up with on the fly. And I was wondering if you have any hints, any clues you can give us on that. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
We do behavioral-based questions, and Dr. Quessenberry is sort of the master behind that process. So I'll have him make a comment about it.
So Ali, this is a great question, and it is difficult. And I will tell you that there's always this dilemma that people have, and I've heard this from candidates. Do I really go for it and be honest and be myself, or do I kind of share my best of the best and paint this picture of who I think that they would want me to be? And so I think personally that we all have brokenness, and we all have stories of difficulty, and it takes courage. I mean, real courage to say who you are and what you struggle with. And I have huge admiration, and I give lots of extra points for somebody who, when we ask a question that's difficult, when they go for it and are real enough to say, this is who I am, here's where I've struggled, and this is how I feel about it. So I will just tell you that being honest about that can be really, really important, I think. Now, having said that, behavior-based questions, they're asking for what you think and sharing stories, and that can be difficult. So it's very appropriate to just take a moment and say, that's a difficult question. Give me a second. It's okay to ponder and pause for a second and just really think about it. You could even say, hey, can we come back to that in a minute? You could even ask that, for gosh sakes. That's as real as it comes. But I can tell you this, our BS meters are high. And if you come up with some pre-canned answer that has nothing to do with it, or you tell the same old story, that is not a great answer. So be free to pause, even come back to it, but to tell a real story of who you are and what's important to you, I would say that those are the important things to keep in mind. Feel free to add to that, you all, other people that do interviewing.
I would just say also, no matter like what kind of question it is, whether it's behavioral or speaking about some of your challenges, always find a way to put a positive spin on it. You know what I mean? Like, if you struggle with something, yes, I struggle with this, but these are like the ways I'm trying to combat that. Or, you know what I mean? Like, just whatever you do, try and put somewhat of a positive light to whatever that difficulty might be, if that makes sense.
Those are great points. Thank you for asking that question. Oyeyemi, do you have a question?
Thank you, friends.
Yes, I do. First, thank you all for this wonderful session. I feel like you gave us a cheat sheet to interview with you. So thank you, we appreciate it. So question is, I'm curious about what is too much post-interview communication. For example, I noticed that Jasmine, happy birthday, she said thank you note or email. Now what if I want to do both? Is that okay? Or I should stick to one and not clog your mailboxes? Thank you.
So I'll say two things here. One is we tell our applicants at the interview, say, look, you're welcome to send a thank you note. We know you're really busy. And so if you don't have time to do that, that's totally fine. We don't look at you differently if we didn't get a note. Some places won't give you that direction. And if they do tell you that, like if we truly would not look at your application differently if we didn't have a note from you. I think if you send it, electronic means is fine. Handwritten ones are unique these days. Snail mail is sort of like a unique thing, but the message gets through no matter. It can happen through electronic means, and we're so used to that. It's easier, obviously. And so personally, I never got upset if people didn't send one, and they also didn't matter what means they sent it to me. Does anybody else have any thoughts about that?
I just want to add between I would definitely stick to one or the other. I wouldn't do both personally. Yeah.
I would add two things to this. It's really funny because Aaron, George, and I have had this conversation. I say to people, don't send me a card. Don't send me anything. If you want to send me chocolates, fine. No, I tell people don't send me anything. And Aaron's like, oh yeah, baby, I want a card. No, so we actually have this thing that we talk about it and say, so here's what I would tell you. If you took the time and energy to apply to a program and go through the whole deal and you interview and you invested how many hours to do that? How much more is a thank you card really going to add to that? So you have made a huge investment. Is a thank you card, and this is my personal perspective, okay? Aaron George will tell you differently. But if you went through all of that, you guys, is a thank you card really that much? So that's my personal opinion. I get little notes. I've even got little gifts. And seriously, if you all interview us, don't send anything. I'm just messing with you. But I don't think it's that big a deal. But if you're going to do it, do something simple and memorable. And here's another one, the second part of that. I'm sorry, that one was too long. Don't email program directors out of the blue and keep emailing them. Don't do it. Please don't do it. Because you use ERAS and you use a program coordinator. Program directors get tons of these off the cuff, hey, here's my CV, I'm interested. Lots of extra correspondence is going to count against you. Just FYI.
I think my brief feedback is if you send a letter, it's nice. We have never made a decision to accept somebody or to rank them based upon a letter. It feels good, but we wouldn't enter into the decision about if they're qualified enough. What we do know is that with applicants now having 40 and 50 interviews, it shows us either A, that they like us and they want to be here, or B, they're really desperate. And so, I mean, genuinely, so it feels good. I like it. No one's going to accept you because you sent a letter, but it's a way to communicate that I have a priority to be there, and that can be helpful.
A single letter is something else I would recommend. Some people have sent to every person they interviewed with and every interaction. That's not necessary. If you send one letter saying, hey, can you share this sentiment with with the folks that I interviewed that day, I'd really appreciate it. And acknowledge what your experience was like is adequate.
Thank you so much.
Vivek?
Hi there. First off, it was refreshing to see such a unified front in terms of leadership down to show up and offer different perspectives. Second, happy birthday, Dr. Galati. My question is more from Dr. Sariki's section about asking the right questions. From a leadership perspective, after you have like the postmortem where, the residents have interviewed, staff is interviewed, leadership's interviewed, are there ever questions that you ask and there'll be like immediate turnouts? Because there's certain questions that I assume everyone has in terms of, what the benefits are, what the life is, what evaluation is like, what the personality of attendings. Are there certain questions that from a leadership perspective you ask the resident interviewers and they can just be like immediate turn-offs or anything like that?
I've had questions that are immediate turnoffs, especially when a resident can, like if an applicant, I had this happen a couple of times. Applicants have been through many interviews, and they'll say to me, so I've been interviewing, and some of the spots I'm looking at, they don't have as rigorous as night call as you do. Like, are you guys thinking about changing yours, or like I wouldn't do something like that. I probably would, you can compare it in the background, but I wouldn't ask a program if they're planning on changing it so that it could meet your needs necessarily. The program is what the program is at that point. And I think I actually had an applicant call me about a week after the interview and said, I really come to your program if you would just change your call schedule. And I said, that's not going to happen. Thank you very much. But so those types of interactions are certainly a turnoff. And that seems like it's extreme, but I have lots of other examples of things like that. I don't know if there's any completely no questions, and the residents may have better advice about this too. I don't know.
I wouldn't say no questions, but some that I can think of from like the past two like cycles that some of the other residents kind of like had a red flag to were applicants who are super focused on like the holiday schedule, like time off. So like, I think it's great to find out what is it that you have to schedule everything ahead of time, or do you have to just give like certain amount of notice? Is it 3 weeks? Is it 2 weeks? I think that that's fine. But the way that some of the applicants have asked before, it just seemed very specific and hyper-focused on the time off. And so for some residents, that was a little bit of a turnoff. Some people too have been like super interested in just like how much money we get for like free food. And so like those types of things, some residents had felt was just like a little bit much. Was it a reason that we didn't rank someone higher or lower? No, but it was definitely something that you remember. Like people remembered, like this was the guy who was like oddly focused on the money or the vacation. And, you like remember those things. And so it might just, put that person in a little bit of a category in people's minds, but that's kind of the things that come to mind first.
The other thing that when you get stuck at the end, when you say, is there any more questions? They say, I don't really have any more questions about you should have like maybe a question in your pocket that can veer you away from the question abyss. And one of the ones that I've always enjoyed, when the applicant felt comfortable enough after they've had their questions answered, they'll say something like, well, why did you come to Meritus? You know what I mean? Or like, how's it been for you here? And just sort of, it's a personal question. It's not invasive or intrusive at all, but it also, they're interested in, it just gets it away from you, and it sort of puts an end to the question cycle, because there's no more sort of formal interview questions happening at that point. And that has led to great conversations. Or, what's it been like raising a family here? And then, I don't have kids, so I have to get to talk about my dogs and all that kind of stuff. So it's a good way to transition, and having that question in your pocket, just to sort of transition away from the question time. These are all great questions. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Janelle.
Hi, thank you everyone. It's good to meet you all again. Happy birthday, Dr. Jasmine. So my question is for Dr. Q. I'm not sure I really understood what you meant when you said you can have one thing say to all your interviewers. Like, I'm just wondering, like, if I'm being asked to tell me about myself, like, it's just one me. Like, I don't really know how to tell one interviewer one thing and tell the other person another thing. Is that what you mean? Because I'm kind of confused. I didn't really get that part.
No, so sometimes what happens is somebody has an event or a story that they've thought through well from their experience. And so they want to tell this rehearsed story to everyone. They recycle the same story with everyone, and it's not. And I don't want to in any way belittle the importance of that story and that meaningful experience, because often it's a very important, life-changing experience. But to use it as the only way to communicate who I am and my meaning in medicine, it's not a good way to engage in the interview process. Does that make sense? Don't share the same story again. And it may be a great story, but it means here's the story I've rehearsed, and this is what I'm going to share with everyone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand better. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
We try to write our questions so that there are not many overlaps, but there are going to be common questions that people are going to ask, like, how was your drive here, or whatever, all that kind of stuff, or how was your the process, or whatever. Those you have to answer the same way, because you can't come up with 10 different answers. But we come away sometimes from the interview and say all they talked about was soccer. In almost every question, there was soccer came up. You know what I mean? So you need to veer away from your main thing that you've really gotten practice around, and just be agile in the conversation. Just be yourself. We just want to see who you are and be yourself.
Hey, Brad, one more thing on that. You all, invariably, what comes up in interview questions is, tell me what your strengths are and tell me what you feel are your weaknesses. And there's this dialogue out there that I'm going to share my strengths, my weaknesses as strengths. Well, like, I just give too much. Well, that's just BS, you all. That's crap. That's a way that I'm not going to be real with you about the struggles. Okay. So here's what I would tell you. Everyone has brokenness, and I firmly believe that the ability to share honestly with others about struggles that I have, to say, sometimes I struggle with keeping all my notes up to date. I've had some issues with that sometimes, and it's been something that I've learned this. And here's what I've learned, and I love what Tommy said about this. It's great to say, here's what I've learned through it. But the ability to be candid about your weaknesses and your struggles doesn't mean that you're broken and defective and we need to get rid of you. It speaks to your maturity and self-knowledge, okay? So once again, the ability to know yourself and to speak honestly about who you are and what you struggle with.
Some of those explanations and stories are the ones that are just so poignant. And and really meaningful. And those are the good, memorable ones that you think, oh my gosh, this person really had to really change their life to get through to where they are today. And that was because they had an issue that was one of their weaknesses that they've really worked through. You know, that's what you come away with.
Thank you so much.
All mine.
Yes, all mine.
Okay, thank you so much for this session. Really appreciate it. I have a question about when we've been given a second look invite and maybe something happened, unfortunately you couldn't come. Does it mean the program is going to rank that candidate down for not attending the second look? I mean, and also I have a question for—
Are you saying if something, like if you had to cancel because something came up?
Yeah.
Or if you just didn't accept it, you just say that I'm not going to be able to make it, which if
maybe
you're canceling,
you had it canceled because something came
yeah.
up.
So
Yeah.
you know what? Stuff happens to all of us. You know, we're all adults. If something happened, your car broke down, you know, got sick, family, whatever, just say, look, try to give as much advance notice as you can and say, look, I am so sad that I can't be there. Is there another opportunity that might be coming up that I can do that? And if not, please, I apologize to the program director, but this is, you know, I've had an event, I've had something come up that is going to prohibit me from coming. You just have to be honest. It happens, you know, to all of us. And we would never, none of us would really judge that. I think if it's genuine and you're genuine about it, that's okay. But if you, so it's okay not to come and say, no, I can't make it. And it's okay to switch if something dramatic happens, certainly. But if you are going to commit and it's just because you don't want to go, after all, that's probably not a good thing. You know, try to commit to it. If you can, if you're going to make the commitment, try to commit. But obviously things come up in your life.
Then my second question is from Tommy's slide as regards resident expectations. I mean, is it like what the new residents expect from the program? I mean, is the question directed to the program directors or to the residents? I mean, yeah.
So I think it's more, I think that's a good question for like faculty, program director, but you can also ask the residents too, right? Because from their perspective, they can say, this is what they expect of us as far as getting your notes done on time within so many days, your, you know, dress code, how you present yourself, attending certain meetings, responsibilities, things like that. So I think it's a great question for the residents because you'll be in that position. But then you can also get it from the faculty perspective, being that they're the ones that oversee us. So, you know, just to get their perspective too. But that's what I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Any final questions that people have? Oh, Vivek, you have one?
Sorry, I have a quick question, and this is just following up because you said like being vulnerable, you know, in the right situation and showing enough emotional intelligence and all that in terms of reading the room and things like that. So my question is just based on your program. I've noticed a lot of your residents have maybe advanced degrees, or they switched careers, or they have global health experience. I come from a similar background. So my question is that how do you play up your past experience without making it seem that that's what you should be doing instead of interviewing for a family medicine residency? It's like deep down, personally, I know that everything I've done is just a conduit to be able to, you know, practice as a family physician with, you know, individual interactions. But if your experiences say something differently, how do you balance that? And questions open to leadership as well as residents who have, you know, eclectic experiences, so to say.
That's very intentional, Vivek. We're looking for residents who want to care about people, and your stories have chapters. The things that you've done have chapters and have meaning, and sharing that meaning in the stories that you share in your interviews is very important. So If you had a public health, or if you had I just looked at an application where a guy was a gas station manager for 15 years. What a story. So what a story to say, I was a gas station manager and I learned a lot about customer service and about life and raising my family. And it brought me back to medicine and caring for people. So thinking about the chapter in your life and the meaning, and bringing that story and the meaning of that chapter to your interview, that's what it's all about. Does that make sense? I mean, maybe that's too heady, but going for the deeper meaning of why you did what you did and why it brought you back to medicine, I mean, that's what it's all about for me.
I think too that you can also find the common ground between your past experiences and family medicine. So for instance, I'm one of those people, I took 4 years off between med school and starting residency. I, did a post-bac in between. I got my master's in public health as well. And I had kind of like a health management policy, global health type background with public health. And I think that you can say, from a global health, public health perspective, these are the tools I learned here, and this is how it connects to family medicine. And this is how I feel like I can use these tools to perfect my craft and improve the way that I practice. So I think it's great to have all these other experiences, and I wouldn't hedge on them. I would, speak about them proudly, but I think it's, if you can find ways to connect them to family medicine and how it can emphasize the type of family med doctor you will be, then I think that you're golden.
That helps a lot. Thank you.
Well said, Tony. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. Scott, is there anything else this evening that we need to do to wrap up, or?
No, just want to say thank you to all the Meritus folks, and thanks for all the students who joined tonight. And I think we are ready to wrap up if you are.
Well, thank you for allowing us for this platform. It's really helpful. I think this topic is really important, and we enjoy doing it. And thank you all for being here.